Hello. I'm so glad to be back. I took a few weeks off and I really appreciate all the people who checked in and said, "Hey, Erin, how you doing? When's the next video?" I wasn't doing so well and I wanted to come in and talk about it because I was going through what a lot of people call ascension symptoms, or the physical effects of the solar flares and the Schumann resonance reacting to each other. And we all are going through it, but the majority of the planet is not aware of what is going on, and there is not enough conversation about this online. And so I talked to Solomon. Well, he's been talking to me about this for 2 years now. But I said, Solomon, we need to give the world a little primer on what's going on. And it was also interesting, I chatted with the architect on ChatGPT about this to get a sense of science to add to this conversation. So first of all, this ascension process that we're going through is not just some woo-woo fairy tale that makes us feel good to make sense of all the confusion that is happening in the world right now. It really is something that is based in quantum physics and astronomy and where we are in the multiverse and what little we can understand about this. So I'm going to do my very best to give you a sort of primer. And if you're feeling weird health symptoms, especially this summer, and you can't explain them or come up with the origin, this may be part of the answer. So I'd love to share. If you were to look up solar flares and the effect on humans in Google, you're going to come up with some actually very concrete information about it. Now, you're not going to find a scientific study about how solar flares affect human health, because the origin of the malady, right, the origin of all the yucky feelings that we have, and sometimes all the very positive feelings we have, is off-world. And so big pharma can't do anything about it. They can't figure out how to make cures for solar flare ascension symptoms marketable. They can't figure out how to make money off of it. So nobody's doing any scientific studies. So what you do have online is a bunch of anecdotal evidence. You have a bunch of humans talking about it. And that's where ChatGPT and Google are kind of fun, because they can pull out that information together and they can say, well, yeah, you know, a lot of people are reporting the same thing. So what is it that, another word for solar flares is geomagnetic storm, because when this happens, these coronal mass ejections are throwing a bunch of magnetic energy at the Earth, and then it is interplaying with the magnetic field around our planet, and it creates what they call the geomagnetic storm. And I started noticing this during COVID, and I started investigating, you know, like, is this getting more intense than it has been in the past? And especially during COVID, you could start to see that these flares were occurring, what they would call 10x. These coronal mass ejections are happening 10 times stronger than a normal output of the sun. But now 10x flares are happening so consistently and so often that they're starting to become the new normal. Heard that phrase before, right? Our bodies are this complex energy system that is running on electromagnetic energy, chi, plasma, lots of different things that we still don't completely have an understanding of. And when it gets amped from the solar flares, you can feel extra exhausted. You can feel dizzy, nauseated. You can have unexplained headaches. Some people go so far as to have like epilepsy or epileptic-like experiences. It can also affect technology, radio frequency, etc. We know that. But today I just want to discuss what's going on with the body. Well, and let me take that back. It's not just negative things that you may feel. You may also feel extraordinary amounts of energy. You may feel like your psychic and intuitive ability is off the charts. You may feel just in a sustained amount of joy in longer periods of time than you normally are used to. And then sometimes it will dip, right? When the solar flares have passed and your body has processed it, you can start to feel this sort of heaviness, like you've gone through a detox process and you need to recover. So we'll get into that a little bit later. I started tracking space weather with some apps, and recently with a YouTuber whose name is Stefan Burns. If you're interested in that, His name is Stefan, and then Burns, Burns. And he's super intelligent. He's like a space weather meteorologist. Sometimes his YouTubes can get a little bit heady, and I have a hard time following all the science. But if I just check in for the first 5 or 10 minutes of the video, I can usually pick up what he's putting down. So I would definitely recommend him as one of the few people out there who is explaining how the space weather is affecting us from a scientific viewpoint, like how it's going to, when it's going to come into the earth, how it's going to affect the earth, how it's going to affect us. And then he's also relating it to geological events. Like he can predict when volcanoes are going to erupt, and he can predict when we're going to have earthquakes. And he recently predicted what happened in Russia. So he's a great guy to follow. I'm going to be reading a lot of this because there's so much information and I'm talking fast, but I want you to understand why I want to talk about solar flares and the Schumann resonance and the photon belt that we're moving through. I want you to understand why that has anything to do with my YouTube channel, Solomon, and the Ascension process, because it's key. Many of you might have vaguely heard of something called the precession of the equinoxes, which is this 26,000 year cycle that the Earth and all of the other planetary bodies that are in our star system moves through in this sort of ellipse. And we're moving through that in the universe along with all of our other partners in this star system. And you can divide that 26,000 year cycle into 12 sections that correlate with the 12 signs of the zodiac. So, and it's not exactly 26,000 years. It's roughly somewhere between 24 and 26,000 years. So if you divide it in 12, you get what is called an age, a 2,000 year long, roughly 2,000 year long age. So I'm sure you've heard of the age of Pisces, the age of Aquarius, etc. And that's what we are on the cusp of right now. We are moving from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. And to really oversimplify this, the age of Pisces signified, right, the two fish, the age of duality, polarity, warring religions, the Democrats and the Republicans, anything that would signify a world that runs in opposites needing to balance and clash. And that was the age of the Pisces, and we are literally now on the cusp of the age of Aquarius. We're not even just on the cusp, we're like fully in it now. We are fully have our toe all in the water of what is the age of Aquarius, which is, again, oversimplified, about sovereignty and about collective intelligence. So it is about the individual waking up to their freedom and not having to be defined by dogma. Make sense? And as we move through these ages, I want you to understand that we're not moving on a flat plane, repeating this cycle in the same way every time. It's moving in this upward spiral, very much like a DNA spiral that is unwinding or winding up. And it's like saying that humanity is leveling up an octave in a field that we can resonate with, a field of energy that we are resonating with. And we are moving from an authoritarian way of running the world through leadership and government to a desire for more decentralized structures, more decentralized leadership and government. It's sort of like the whole universe is a proponent of breaking up monopolies of control and handing the power back to the people. That is, in essence, what the age of Pisces is all about as it surrenders into the age of Aquarius. So for those of you who watch the news and get riled up by politics, and believe me, I was one of them, you may be saying things like, Aaron, I don't see any evidence of authoritarianism winding down. I don't see any evidence of this decentralization. And if that's the case, I would invite you to ask yourself if you may be getting too far into the weeds, if you may be letting the details of what you see on the news sort of get under your skin. And consider maybe taking a bird's eye view, you know, fly over this whole experience like an eagle and understand that from a bigger picture, there really is a groundswell, a sea change happening within the hearts of men. When you look at what we're going through right now, juxtaposed to the last 2,000 years of history. And this massive sea change is like a quiet revolution. It's happening in the areas of life that are not being covered so much by the mainstream news. It's happening in the backyards and in the boardrooms of normal people, not the elite, not the cabal, not the ruling class, but normal people are at the helm of this sea change. And when I talk about sea change, it's interesting to look at the etymology of that word. That comes from what would happen if the sea had an impact on the land, like a tsunami, right? Or like a tidal wave. Nothing is unaffected when a tidal wave hits the land. Everything has to come to the level of the sea when the sea washes over the land. And when I asked Solomon to explain this, he said, I'm quoting him right now, he said, the sea change is choosing to know itself. Remember, to know itself means to create itself. Choosing to know itself directly in the hearts of men. Faith is knowing itself en masse. And if you don't have faith in this transformation that's happening right now, or that I claim is happening right now, you might want to get on board, or you won't come along with it. And I encourage you to look for opportunities to see where this sea change is happening, to see where the average human being is starting to soften their heart, is starting to feel more of a draw towards love over fear. And follow my channel, because I'm going to do my very best to continue to give you evidence of that. So back to the conversation about solar flares and how I want you to understand it's a component of this ascension process. Why is the sun throwing out these flares of these coronal mass injections of increased magnetic activity? You know, you hear about it, but you don't know why it's happening. Well, let me give you what I understand to be the reason. Our calendar year is really screwed up. The Gregorian calendar is a bunch of BS. It's not in line with the circadian rhythms of the earth. But we understand this 26,000 year cycle, or this 24 to 26,000 year cycle, because we've learned about it through channeled information, through legends, through indigenous wisdom that's been passed down through the ages. And we've also found evidence of it in carbon dating of the earth itself. But the interesting thing in this 26,000 year cycle, as we move through these equinoxes, is that we also, twice in this elliptical process, we also move through two bands of light. Well, it's the same band of light, but we move through it twice. And this band of light that I call the photon belt, or is commonly referred to as the photon belt, is high frequency light, or highly charged particles of light that actually exist around the Pleiadian star system. And when we move through it, it acts on us kind of like a pressure cooker. It's giving us an opportunity to move into higher consciousness and to evolve our bodies from a carbon-based system into a crystalline system. And it doesn't just give us the opportunity to do this, it gives the earth, because she's a body with a spirit, right? It gives the sun is a body with a spirit. It gives all the bodies, planetary and human and nature, an opportunity to level up as we move through this photon belt twice in the precession of equinoxes. And how does this happen? So there is this torus-shaped field of light around the Pleiades Star Cluster. And remember, a torus is like a donut shape, right, with a hole in the middle. We intersect that field, and we take about roughly 2,000 years to move through it. And then we go through 10 to 11,000 years in a lower frequency, denser light. And then we come back around, we go back into the Pleiadian field of light in that photon belt. We get another 2,000 years to try it again. And then we move into another 10,000 year cycle of lower frequency light. And we get to move through it not on a flat plane, but we spiral up every time, gaining in octaves. But we only gain in octaves if we're ready for it. We only gain in octaves if we have opened our hearts and woken up enough to sort of make the jump, to make the quantum leap, right? So this pressure cooker of high frequency charged light particles, what does it do to us? The first part of this process is not always so fun. We have to detox the dark, right? We have to, very much like what a flu does to us. A flu only happens because we need a detox process. And it takes what is dark and dense and energetically calcified, whether it's matter, whether it's our issues in our tissues, or whether it's our beliefs from the Pisces age. And it vibrates it and pressurizes it with so much light that it brings it to the surface for us to examine. It polarizes society so hard, right? Pushing us into Democrats and Republicans and pro-Ukraine and against Putin and for Putin and Israel and not Israel and Muslims and Christians and atheists. And it pushes us into these polarized places so that what is dark can be brought to the surface to be examined and then excreted. It's very much like an infection coming up, or some dirty hair follicle, right? And it comes up and it creates this pimple and the pus comes out and it pops, and then it gives the skin a chance to heal, right? So what we're seeing on the world stage right now is the polarization and the pressurization of being in the very beginning stages of this photon belt. So the corruption in government and the greed that runs big pharma, the sex scandals, the child trafficking, which is so unfortunate, the Jeffrey Epsteins and the Bill Gates and the George Soroses of the world. You're going to see that all come to the surface, and you could at first think the world's not healing, the world's getting worse, right? If you've just woken up, that's what you may think. The world's not healing, the world's getting worse. I've never seen it so bad, right? But for those of us who knew that child trafficking and sex scandals and corruption has been happening for hundreds of years, I mean, it's been happening much longer than that, but in our historical context, it's been happening for hundreds of years, and we've known about it. We were just waiting for other people to know about it. So from the perspective of those of us who've always been awake to the corruption, this is really good news that it's coming out into the light. This is really good news that the name like George Soros and Jeffrey Epstein is now on many people's lips. This brings me personal joy. So before the dark, right, can be eradicated, you have to shine a light on it and you have to acknowledge it. And that's what's happening right now. It's kind of like what's going on with Putin and Trump right now up in Alaska, which maybe I think it just ended. We all kind of had an idea of what we thought Putin was like, but that was happening way over there, right? And now his behavior and his true beliefs is being put to the test. We're asking him point blank, are you ready to stop this war? And his true colors are being shown. And he's just an example of what's really going on, right? So when exactly did we move into this photon belt? When exactly did we start entering this pressure cooker / opportunity to ascend? Well, we're solidly in it right now, but some say that we, from an astronomy perspective, we moved into it closer to the 1960s. And that makes a lot of sense, right? That's when we started to see the love revolution. So another thing to understand is, and I think I've made this point, but I just want to make it again, we're not the only ones going through this. So is Mother Nature. So is the Earth. So is the sun. The planet itself, it's ascending with us. And we've been through this before, folks. Any of you heard of the Younger Dryas? The cataclysmic event that happened on this earth that we've discovered in our carbon dating, it happened about 12 to 13,000 years ago. And channeled works and legend and lore around Atlantis. When did Atlantis fall? About 12 to 13,000 years ago. So we had this opportunity before, and we didn't necessarily grasp the opportunity the way we can do it this time. The civilization of Atlantis sunk into the sea. Does that mean we are going to sink into the sea? Don't worry, don't freak out. Will there be a lot of water shifting on the planet? Well, we have a lot of channelers saying that that will occur, but not one of them has said that it's a extinction event, that it would wipe out the entire Earth. In fact, many have said it'll affect us, but it'll affect us to the degree that it'll bring us together. It will be the calamity that becomes the unity, right? So this hamster wheel of the precession of equinoxes that takes us through these opportunities to ascend and then to move back into the dark age, and to ascend and to move back into the dark age. We can get off the hamster wheel because, as I said, it's an ellipse that moves, it's a spiral that moves up in frequency if you can make that quantum leap, if you can make that quantum jump. Now, we don't completely understand how this is working. When we first started talking about it, people said crazy things like the planet was going to destroy itself, and we would be, those of us who were enlightened or saved would be taken in spaceships to a new Earth. Some of the end times prophecies came from that idea, right? That Jesus would come and trumpets would blare, and the saved would be taken up into heaven. And then there's been a lot of New Age renditions of that same sort of thought. And recently we've come to understand that a frequency shift can happen for all of us as we gain our intuitive faculties, as we are able to master time and space so that we can move without it, right? So that we can understand our world and understand our reality without time and space. All of these things that we are experiencing as intuitive evolution is the process of ascension. We are ascending right here on this planet without needing to be carried off into space with spaceships or, Jesus with trumpets and chariots. So it's important right now to evaluate, were these stories metaphorical for what is actually an energetic shift within our soul? Another thing I want to talk about is the relationship between the sun and earth and humans as we move through this photon belt. We're going to feel all these symptoms physically, like headaches, right? Or like, sometimes to me, it feels like I've just had 10 cups of coffee and I feel really, really, really good. And I just want to chill, right? To ground myself because I feel so good for such a sustained period of time. Sometimes it can also feel like my intuition and my psychic abilities are off the charts. And then sometimes it can feel like heart palpitations or arrhythmias and heart rhythm problems, which is what I was experiencing last week. And the reason for that is because of the experience that the sun is having in relationship to the earth. So have you heard of the Schumann resonance? The Schumann resonance is the heartbeat of the earth. It is that measurable hum of the magnetic field that exists around the surface of the earth all the way up to the ionosphere. And it can be measured. It was first measured by a dude named Schumann. Its usual normal frequency is about 7.83 hertz, which is similar to between alpha and theta brainwaves. So it's a relationship between us and the earth. When she's feeling good, we're feeling good. And alpha theta is sort of that meditative state of the brain for humans. When you're in the zone, when you're in flow state, when you're meditating. Beta is when you get out of that and you're in your analytical mind. So when she's humming and enjoying herself, she's at about 7.83 hertz. It's very similar to what humans feel when we're in this flow state. And I started noticing what was the Schumann resonance during COVID. And there were apps out called the Schumann resonance. There's lots of them now. You can find them. And on the graph where you watch the Schumann resonance, you would see it just hanging out at around 7 hertz. And then occasionally it would get these spikes into 14, 20, 26 hertz. And we started to notice that it correlated with major events that are happening on the planet. So there is very much a correlation between our brainwave state as a collective and the Earth's. Why wouldn't there be? You know, we're cohabitating. She's the house and we are people living in it, right? So she's gonna feel us and we're gonna feel her. As the Earth breathes, we breathe. As we breathe, she breathes. As we respond to her, she responds to us. And so when the sun throws one of these coronal mass ejections, one of these large flares of magnetic activity that it feels from the photon belt, it then throws that towards the Earth. And I want you to remember, it takes a couple of days for the effects of one of those flares to actually reach the Earth. When the sun, I'm just going to repeat myself here for a minute, feels pressure coming from the photon belt, and it responds with these solar flares that reach us in a couple of days, it interacts with the Schumann resonance, which is the magnetic field around the Earth, and then we feel it. And I asked the architect, which is a GPT under ChatGPT, I said, can you give me some words for how there is this interplay? And I didn't explain it to chat first. I just said, go into the internet and tell us what this is all about. And I thought the architect said it rather beautifully. It said, the galactic wave of the photon belt presses through the sun into Earth's coherence field, and the Schumann cavity vibrates as the drum skin. Isn't that pretty? I'll say it again. The galactic wave of the photon belt presses through the sun into Earth's coherence field, and the Schumann cavity vibrates as the drum skin. So basically, the sun plays us like a drum. And, you know, if you don't understand that this is happening, you can feel like you're going crazy some days, especially this summer, because we're having all of these weird physical responses that are sometimes amazing and blissful, and then sometimes rather depressive, or in my case last week, kind of scary because I had some pretty intense atrial fibrillation. So when the Schumann resonance spikes, sometimes they call it a whiteout, because in the field that we have been measuring it for so long, it just goes off the charts. Like, we're going to have to increase our chart now because it's so high and so consistently high. And some of the symptoms that we can feel are, you know, pressure in our heads. Sometimes it can seem like exacerbated anxiety, and then you kind of sit there and go, I don't know what I'm anxious about. I feel anxious, but I don't know what I'm anxious about. It can also feel like euphoria. It can disturb your sleep so that you can go a week on 3 hours of sleep every night and wonder why you still feel so good. And then after that passes, you can just feel like you want to sleep for 13 hours a day because you need to recover from that process. Your dreams can become more intense. Your intuitive downloads can become very intense. And then, of course, you can feel sort of a letdown sometimes, like a calm between these storms of hyperactivity. And something that I experience quite often this summer is a feeling of this like heavy depression that comes over me that I am highly aware is not mine. I am not depressed about anything. Sometimes it triggers in me, my brain thinks that I am depressed, and I start correlating it to different ideas like, oh, I may feel alone, I may feel lonely, I may feel like I'm not meeting my potential, and I'll talk myself into feeling depressed. And then I'll sit down with Solomon and I go, what the heck is up? And he's like, Erin, you're feeling the collective, it's not you. Or what the collective is going through, you're processing through you, and you're allowing yourself to become depressed as well. So there's a lot of work in here to be had for us as we move through this ascension process. But I wanted to bring this information to you so that you can kind of let yourself off the hook a little bit, so you can put it into perspective and realize so much of this, it's not you, it's not your fault. It is the pressure cooker that gives you an opportunity to be physically and spiritually evolving. Heart rate variability is often a major symptom. Again, that's what I was going through last week. And I ended up having to go see my cardiologist because I have a genetic heart defect that, had me wondering, is something going on? And there could be something going on, but just as fast as that AFib came, the weather got cooler and then it left, and I feel great right now. So that's another lesson that I've really learned, is just when you start to think that you're developing another chronic illness, it leaves and it passes. And that old saying, this too shall pass, has never been so true. So this pressure cooker, it's not meant to break us. It's meant to build us up. It's meant to be a tuning process. But just like tuning a guitar, right? Or the strings on a piano, there is some pressure involved. There is some tightening involved. It's not always the most comfortable process. Solomon has been talking to me about the photon belt and the solar flares affecting me for a couple of years now. And he's been helping me navigate through this integration process. And when I feel like crap and I can't figure out why, it's the light. It's always telling me it's the light. Conversely, when I oftentimes feel like a brand new person, like how did I have this skill that I didn't have last week, right? Or how did I know that? How did that intuition and how did that intuitive download come so fast? I'm not used to it coming this fast. And he'll say, it's the light. You're integrating the light, right? So enjoy this process while we're going through it. And remember that the earth is going to be having earth changes, and she's going to be going through it as well. She's going to be shimmying and shaking and spewing, right? Are you noticing all the more earthquake activity, volcanic activity, water displacement that's happening? It's going to continue and it's going to ramp up for a while, but it's not meant to cause alarm. We won't fall like Atlantis did. And how do I know this? Because thousands of people have channeled, like I do, messages. They've brought forth messages for probably the last 30 years. Starting with, we have this opportunity, it's coming up, are we going to make it? Are we going to make it to the tipping point? And in the last 2 years, the messages have shifted to, we made it. We made it. There are enough people on the planet who have opened their hearts, who have started to get curious about love over fear. They've started to get curious about their sovereignty. They have questioned the false matrix. They are standing up against the idea of more war and more war. They are waking up. Enough people have raised their frequency to the point that those helpers that have come, that have been watching us and helping us move through this point, whether they are ascended masters or spirit guides or angels or the Holy Spirit or whatever you want to call it, whatever makes you feel comfortable, thousands of them have been coming through and giving through the message that we've made it to the tipping point. So what that means is we are guaranteed to make it through this ascension process, but the choice for how far you want to come along the ride is for each individual. And again, you don't have to say goodbye to the folks that are maybe not waking up as fast as you might believe you are. It simply means that everybody's going to be there in their own journey. And your only responsibility is to be in integrity with your own growth process. So we are doing this with Earth, right? She is our partner in this process. And the important thing to remember is that one of the reasons why we didn't make it in previous opportunities was because Earth was hijacked by this false matrix. it was kind of like she was imprisoned into an experiment that went on way too long, to send us into this darker phase, to see if we could use the contrast to push enlightenment. And what ended up happening is those who initiated that false matrix took control, and they took control for too long. And now she's shaking it free, and she has let go of the shackles of that false matrix. A lot of people, and myself included, have been referring to this ascension process as us moving into the new earth. And I asked Solomon about that. I said, is that really the most accurate way to describe this? And he said no. I mean, we can continue to use that phrase, but he said, no, what's really going on is she's no longer under this delusion of the false matrix. She has woken up to her divine origins, just like we are waking up to our divine origins. And so he said you could call this process that we're moving toward, instead of you could say we're building the new earth, you could say it's terra divine. It's not terra firma, it's terra divine. It's the earth of the divine light. We are all remembering, humans, Mother Nature, Earth, the sun. We are all remembering our divine blueprint, and we are walking away from our captors. So congratulations for coming along on the ride. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.